If you're given an opportunity, take it, because what's the worst thing that can happen? Don't be afraid of what you don't know. You can always learn. A little boy who lived in Watford, and he'd had leukemia for the last 7 years. He'd been in and out of hospital, and he was the first patient to get this CAR-T treatment in the whole country, and it worked. So I've got the absolute best group of people in the 5 teams that I look after. They're really clever, they're really committed, and want to make a difference to the life of the patient.
Hello there, I'm Sarah McCluskey, and this is Research Adjacent. Each episode, I talk to amazing research adjacent professionals about what they do and why it makes a difference. Keep listening to find out why we think the research adjacent space is where the real magic happens. Hello there, and welcome to episode 55 of the Research Adjacent podcast. For this episode, I'm delighted to welcome Deb Lancaster. Deb works for Genomics England as a service owner. Now, if you're wondering exactly what a service owner is, then you are not alone. I was too. Deb describes it as a kind of head of department role where she leads 5 different teams. You might also be wondering exactly what those teams do. Well, Genomics England is a unique government-owned facility which both sequences DNA for the NHS and also maintains DNA databases for research purposes. Deb's teams are all on the research side of things, and they help researchers to find and access the data that they need. Deb came to Genomics England 3 years ago after spending 30 years in the pharmaceutical industry. In our conversation, you'll hear about some of the drugs that she has helped to launch and the impact of some of the research projects which are using Genomics England data. You'll also hear about why she is still learning new things every day and why she has learned to feel the fear and do it anyway. This episode actually came about when Deanna Barrick from the Behind the Genes podcast got in touch to suggest a collaboration, because people who like podcasts, right? So if you enjoy hearing about the research side of Deb's work, then follow the link in the show notes or just search for Behind the Genes in your podcast app to hear more about the research that Genomics England are facilitating. But for now, listen on to hear Deb's story. Welcome along to the podcast, Deb. Thank you so much for coming along to tell us a bit about what you do. Shall we just start there? Tell us about your job, what it is that you do.
Okay, it's a bit of a complicated one and probably a bit of a different one as well. I work as a service owner at Genomics England, which is a job title that means nothing to anyone. But basically, I'm kind of a head of department. So I look after 5 teams of people who are the user-facing, the researcher-facing people within Genomics England. So those 5 teams consist of a team that engage with academics and clinical academics, another team who engage with our industry partners, so pharma and biotech. Then I've got a team called Bioinformatics Consulting, and they do very clever consultancy work, paid for work, for people who don't have the bioinformatic capability themselves and they need to do analytics on our data set. Then I've got clinical research interface, which is the way we get new diagnoses to patients and enable collaboration between clinicians and researchers. And finally, airlock, which is a really interesting one. At Genomics England, our data is all anonymised, but we have to be really, really sure that any data that comes out of our data set for a publication or a conference presentation or anything like that has to be unidentifiable. So every piece of data that a researcher wants to take out of our research environment has to be checked through the airlock system. And we have a committee meeting every week and we go through them, and it's just for safety and data governance purposes. So I look after those 5 teams, and they're pretty much all of the user-facing researcher teams.
Yeah, I think to help make sense of how that work that you do fits into the big picture, it'd be really helpful to hear a bit more about Genomics England and what they do. You're almost like a library, but for DNA, is from what I can gather.
Yeah, I guess you could say that. The way we're structured, so first of all, the setup, we're a wholly owned government organisation. So we're a limited company, but we've got a single shareholder who's the Secretary of State for Health. And obviously we've all just acquired a new boss, so we're waiting to see how that goes. And as part of that, we do two main things. So we have a healthcare setup, which is where all the whole genome sequencing for the NHS is done through the Genomic Medicine Service. At the moment, we do cancer and rare disease patients. Certain cancers, certain rare disease are commissioned for whole genome sequencing by the NHS. So we enable that through our sequencing partner. And then the main piece of work we do is through our bioinformatics pipelines, which are very long and very complicated algorithms that actually look at the genome of every person that has had their genome sequenced and flag any areas where there's an actionable mutation, an actionable variant, so that we can get those diagnoses and those recommendations back to the NHS. So that's one half of the business. The other half is the research side, and that is the NGRL, which is the National Genomic Research Library. And you're right, that's the DNA library that we hold. All these data contributed very, very selflessly by our participants and by patients who consent to have their genome and healthcare data held in the NGRL. So we make that available to researchers to develop our understanding of genomic science, to make multiple new discoveries and findings, and also to develop treatments for both rare disease and cancer. That's kind of an overview of what we do. And I think we're pretty unique in the healthcare ecosystem, being a limited company and not the NHS, but we work with the NHS. We're very closely bound to them.
Yeah. And is that, you said they're quite unique in terms of how you operate. Is that just in the UK or is that internationally that you're quite unique?
I'd say we're definitely unique globally. There are quite a few DNA databases around the world, but none that I'm aware of actually have a live service serving their healthcare system. They're purely for research.
And so if somebody wants to so if you've got a researcher who's trying to do some research into some, like you've said, there are things like cancers that are associated with specific mutations and that kind of thing, they would come to you and say, this is what we're looking for. Can we, get access to this particular data set? Is that how it works? And then it goes through your airlock. Yes.
Only when they want to take the data out of a rush environment. Yes. We have a signing up process that fully accredits the researcher to make sure they're a bona fide researcher, they're suitably qualified, that they work for an institution that we've already, usually a university, that we've already got signed up. And they go through a raft of questions and steps, and then they're allowed into our research environment when they register a project. So a project has to be approved internally by our teams. We've got delegated authority for that from our Access Review Committee, which is an independent group that just makes sure we're doing the right thing with the data that people have donated.
Yeah. And when you say research environment, is it a physical location or is it like an online thing?
It's a bit of a mixture at the moment. We do have some huge data centres where we've got what we call on-premise storage, but we also use a lot of cloud storage too. So it's a mixture, but it's all digital.
Yeah, fascinating. No, it is. It's just the idea of having I think people can conceive of a library, but then the idea that you've got this almost, as I say, kind of library of genomic information. It's fascinating.
And knocking on for a couple of 100,000 individuals as well. So it's not small.
No,
there's an awful lot of data there, petabytes and petabytes of it.
Yeah, and I imagine that because of having that collection of data, there have been some really amazing findings that have come out of having access to that.
Yeah, it's been incredible, really. Some of the things that have come out. There were a couple of papers recently where a new gene discovery was made, RNU42, and it turned out that single variant in that gene was responsible for 0.4%, which doesn't sound very much, but in the scheme of things it is, of all neurodevelopmental disorders.
Mm.
And it made both of these papers made a really big splash when they were published. And because of those papers and the validation of those genes, we were able to go back, relook at our data set and make 120 odd new diagnoses for patients who'd been, they'd never been diagnosed, children who've got neurodevelopmental disorders and their parents just don't know what's wrong with them. No, they do. And that's really satisfying when you get things like that.
And to find, to be able to make that connection from not just from the research. And as you say, 0.4%, that's 1 in 200. That's not a tiny, when you put it the other way. But actually to make that connection to real people out in the real world, learning something about themselves.
Absolutely. And we did an audit earlier this year of all the research projects, which we've had 600 odd in total since Genomics England launched the research environment. And the numbers that came back from that were amazing. So only in the past year, we've seen over 200 PhD and MSc theses written based on our data, 20 or so changes to clinical practice, which is good because normally it's early research and the patient impact is years down the road. But we've actually seen 20 changes to actual clinical practice today. 150 conference presentations, 70 odd publications, lots and lots of great outputs. And it's really good to see that the data set's being used and used to such great benefit.
That's it, doing something that really makes a difference. Excellent.
Yeah.
So coming back then maybe a bit to your role and what you do, I'm guessing from what I've known of heads of department, if we stick with that analogy, your job probably involves lots of meetings. Would that be fair to say?
So many meetings. I can't tell you how many meetings. Sometimes I don't even get a cup of coffee. It's just back to back all day. But I have to say, I've worked in a lot of different places over the years, and my career prior to coming to Genomics England was in pharma. And I have never worked with a better bunch of people. Absolutely amazing group, really, really clever and lovely as well, which is not always the case.
Oh, well, that's a fantastic endorsement. Well, you've hinted there that you've had a bit of a career journey before you've got to this point. So maybe tell us a bit about how you got to where you are now.
Yeah, sure. So straight from university where I did genetics, though that is a very, very little use to me now. It was so long. I think things have moved on a little bit.
Area, that's changed a lot.
Yeah. So I've always had an interest in that area, and I went into the pharma industry from university because and this is going to sound wrong, but I've got a fascination with drugs and pharmacology and how different chemicals can change the way your body functions. So I went into pharma and I stayed there for 30 plus years in a variety of different roles. And the last 14, 15 years, I was on the country leadership teams for 2 major global pharma companies. And, sometimes things in your life change and it's time for a rethink. And I knew about Genomics England because when I was at one particular company, as Genomics England launched, and there was this huge audacious goal of sequencing 100,000 genomes, which everybody said, they'll never do that. I introduced Genomics England to the company I worked for at the time and got them to be one of the early investors. So ever since then, and that was 10 plus years ago, ever since then, I've kind of followed the fortunes of Genomics England and always been really interested. And when I got the opportunity to change my career, to go into a different sector, Genomics England was the first place I thought of. So I was lucky enough to already know someone who worked here. So I phoned them up and they said, we've got this role coming up, apply for it. And I did and got it. And that was 3 years ago. And it was a bit of a shock to the system at first. I came in as a biologist thinking, I'll know something about what's going on. No, it's all data. There's very little biology involved at the minute. It's all about how can you store that much data? How can you keep that much data safe? How can you make sure people can access it? But I've never learned as much in such a short period of time. It's great. I really enjoy it.
It's amazing to come to a point, to think you've got 30 years behind you, but you're still learning about new things.
Yeah, more than ever.
Excellent. So you said there you came in as a biologist, you went into pharma. So when you were in the pharmaceutical industry, were you working as a biologist, as a researcher, and then
No,
no?
I was my final role, 2 roles on the leadership team were as market access director.
Mm.
So I worked with NHS England and with NICE on the pricing, cost effectiveness, and all the data and the dossiers that you needed to be able to get these drugs to patients. And I'd say the 2 standout things for me in my pharma career were launching Herceptin in the UK, which has done so much good over so many years. So I'm really proud of that. And also leading the team that got positive NICE guidance for the first RT therapy, chimeric antigen receptor therapy.
Okay, what's that? What's that for? Right. Okay, stem cell therapy. Yeah.
So it was a treatment for the first indication was a treatment for childhood leukemia, and I remember launching it, and then the following month, hearing about a little boy who lived in Watford who was the first patient to be given it in the UK, and he'd had leukemia for the last 7 years. He'd been in and out of hospital. Every treatment had failed. He kept relapsing, and he was the first patient to get this CAR-T treatment in the whole country, and it worked.
Fantastic.
And as far as I'm aware, he's still okay.
Yeah.
And so it's not just in Genomics England where you get that kind of warm, fuzzy feeling for having done something that's positive in the world. So that was a big deal.
Yeah, and that's fantastic, amazing stories. And is that something that was really important to you when you were looking at what career options, what you were thinking, what journey you might go down, that you wanted something which was kind of real world impact?
Yeah, definitely. And I saw Genomics England as being able to couple that need for impact with my passion and interest for genomics and tailored treatments, and really getting to the bottom of what's causing a disease or a condition. And it's done exactly that.
Excellent. Well, so I mean, you've told us a little bit there about some of the things you've done that you're really proud of in your pharmaceutical career. You've not been at Genomics England for that long, but are there any things that have happened since you've moved into that role that really stand out?
The publications that I spoke about earlier that had that big impact on so many patients in our data set, and I'd say generally it's you don't tend to get the big spikes like you do in pharma of this drug's been launched, it's making a difference. It tends to be more incremental. I think probably the thing I'm proudest of here is more of a slow burn, and it's the performance of my teams. I've got the absolute best group of people in the 5 teams that I look after. They're really clever, they're really committed, and want to make a difference to the life of the patients. And I think it's rare that you have a whole company that's got a common purpose. And you could ask anybody at Genomics England, why are you here? And it's to make a difference to people's lives. And you could say that in pharma, and probably 80% of people would say that. Yeah. But there's always people who aren't in it for those reasons. But it's really lovely to have that centricity of our participants, our patients, and research for the future at the centre of everything everybody does.
It does sound quite unique. I think most people, even if you think about companies, there'll often be lots of different products or things you're doing. But yeah, to feel like everybody's working towards that common purpose is quite amazing, really.
Yeah. And everybody cares about it too.
Yeah.
There's nobody who thought, got to do X, Y, Z today.
Yeah.
It's, there's a real commitment there.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. That's great to hear. So although you've clearly done some amazing things throughout your career, I'm sure at times there have been challenging moments as well, whether that has been in this transition into a different type of work or just broader challenges. Is there anything you'd like to tell us about there?
I think I've already mentioned one of the challenges, the data, not biology, when I was a complete novice at any sort of data science. And I still am. I've got a very thin patina of knowledge that I can probably fool about 10% of people with. But I've got the experts that I can go to and ask them. So that was a challenge. The steep learning curve was a challenge. When I first joined Genomics England, I thought I would never ever get to grips with the complexity of it. But like osmosis, over the first few months, you kind of absorb it. And there's a lot of differences as well between the private and public sector.
Mm-hmm.
I used to moan a lot about bureaucracy and red tape in the private sector, but coming into the public sector is a whole different kettle of fish. So things like procurement are so much more complex, and rightly so. You know, it's taxpayers' money. You can't go spending it willy-nilly. But that's been a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
Just learning about all the different things that you need to do, the different hoops that you need to jump through to get things done.
Yeah,
has been I'm still learning. I still learn stuff every day.
well, aren't we all? But it sounds like, as you said, you've got a great team around you. And sometimes as well, I often think that's the sign of a great leader, is if you know what you don't know and you trust the people that you work with, that they know what they know.
Not necessarily true, but I'll take it.
Oh, excellent. So I do like to ask my guests who come on the podcast, because it's lovely to talk about what's going well, but there's always some little things that could be a little bit better. And if you had a magic wand, what would you like to change about the world that you work in?
Oh, there's lots of things. I think that there'd be lots of things that would just make my life easier. that would be a little.
You're allowed to.
that would be selfish. So I'll go to the big picture stuff. And I think in my current role, I would absolutely love it if every cancer and every rare disease patient could undergo whole genome sequencing, have their data in our research environment, and get the absolute best treatment for their specific condition. And if there isn't one, for their data to be used by researchers so that can be made available in the future. And I'd love there to be a way to quickly and scalably get all these new discoveries to patients, because we know now that we could, and I'm working on another piece that Genomics England are involved in, that the government announced in the autumn statement last year, the Rare Therapies Launchpad. And one of the things that we're looking at there is looking at tailored antisense oligonucleotides. So it's an RNA. I
was going to say, might need an explanation of that. Yeah.
And what it does, it's a drug that is made, it's a bit of RNA, which everybody knows because of the RNA vaccines, and it's made to match the variant, or commonly known as a mutation, in that particular patient's DNA.
Mm-hmm.
And it can stop it expressing a protein, or it can make it start expressing a protein, or whatever needs to be done. Mm-hmm. It can block a bit, or it can promote a bit of the DNA. And we know that now we could, for quite a large proportion of the patients in our data set, we could go to a manufacturer and work with them, or enable a clever researcher to work with them, to develop a treatment specifically for that patient. So even if there's only one patient in the world, you could make something that would...
And you could do it economically? Yeah, like it's not a huge...
It's not like a gene therapy.
Right,
it's not something that would cost the NHS millions,
mm-hmm.
but it wouldn't be paracetamol.
No, but you know what I mean. So but it's more kind of feasible. Yeah,
it's more feasible, and this is my wish. I am waving a magic wand.
Absolutely.
So, but at the moment, there's no way for that. There's no pathway within the NHS for that to get to patients, because you couldn't have a proper product license for a treatment like that, because you'd only have for one person.
How do you safety test it and all that kind of thing?
You can't. Yeah. And how do you do all the clinical studies on it? You can't. If you've got 1, 2, or 3 patients with that specific variant, you can't. So you couldn't have a proper product license. It couldn't go through a NICE assessment because, again, no clinical studies, no data, and nothing to put in. And therefore, you wouldn't get reimbursement from the NHS. So we need a different way of looking at this. We need some magic wand to make it so that the NHS can support these patients in getting these treatments. And that's my ambition. It'll take a very, very long time, I've no doubt, but the science is there.
That's amazing that the science is there. Yeah, that we can do something so unique to individual people. So what proportion, when you said you'd love it if everybody got sequenced, do you have any idea what kind of proportion of people get sequenced at the moment?
Oh, I'd say it's tiny out of the whole population. So if you think over 10 years, we've probably got approaching 200,000 people.
Yeah, that is
in our data set,
isn't it? Yeah.
So don't ask me to work out the percentage.
No, that's fine.
It's not very big.
We can, but thinking about when people are diagnosed with, they're suspected that they've got a cancer or a rare gene related illness, is it quite routine to get those people sequenced already, or is that something that we're not there yet?
It varies.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the referrals we get are from a small group of clinicians who've done it. They know how to do it. They keep doing it. They see the benefit. So it's kind of the 80-20 rule. More people could do it. More clinicians could refer for whole genome sequencing. Although there is a limited list, we've probably got about 20 or 30 rare diseases that can be whole genome sequenced. And they're chosen on the basis of the fact that sequencing them completely will give some sort of actionable insight, hopefully.
Yeah.
And a small number of cancers. For instance, there's breast cancer is huge, but only a certain subtype of breast cancer is going to be available for whole genome sequencing. And again, it's because you may well find an actionable mutation, an actionable variant there that's going to help provide treatment.
Fascinating. I'm learning a lot in this, because even though I did maybe a bit like you, I did a biology degree, but I feel like you say, it's just moved on so much in 25 years that
definitely.
So one final question for you, which is, if there's anybody listening who likes the sound of your career journey, what sort of advice would you give them?
It's an odd career journey, so I'm not sure anybody would want to undertake the whole thing.
But
for where
maybe this kind of management in pharmaceutical industry or management in research type roles.
I'd probably say be prepared every day for something to come in from left field, and be flexible. Don't put your sights on a certain journey and not be prepared to deviate from that when things happen. Now, I've interviewed people over the years, and when I've asked them, so what do you want to do long term? They've got it all mapped out. Well, I'll be X role in 2 years, and then in another 3 years I'll be this, and I'll be general manager in 10 years. And it's just not feasible to plan things like that, because you've no idea what's going to hit you from the side while you're on that journey. You've no idea what opportunities are going to come up. And I'd probably say, if you're given an opportunity, take it, because what's the worst thing that can happen? I've taken roles that I've been terrified of taking. I was asked to take on the market access director role donkeys years ago, and I'd never done market access. I knew nothing. And every morning for the first few months, I woke up feeling like somebody had punched me in the chest. And my boss at the time said, I asked you to do it because they're all fighting with each other, and they need somebody to go in and make them play nicely and work well together. You don't need to know anything about market access. All you need is to be able to sort people out and make sure that they're all motivated and facing in the same direction. And it was good advice.
Yeah.
So don't be afraid of what you don't know. You can always learn, and grab an opportunity even if it scares you.
Yeah, I do think that's excellent advice. I think of all the people I've interviewed in this podcast, there's maybe been about 2 or 3 who have actually come out of university. There's something they wanted to do and they went and did it. And they are very much the minority. So yeah, good advice. Well, if somebody wants to find out more about you or the work you do, where might Where might we redirect people? Oh dear.
Okay, well, at Genomics England, we've got a great website that covers all the different areas that we focus on. We've got a podcast called Behind the Genes, which comes out every so often. I'm not entirely sure on the frequency, but it's really varied and good. And there's some really excellent guests on those podcasts. So I would recommend those. And for a specific query, we've got an information email. So it's info@genomicsengland.co.uk. And that will be triaged by the central team and sent to the person who can hopefully answer your question.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, I'll get links to those as well, and I'll put them all into the show notes. So that it just remains to say thank you so much for taking the time to come along and tell us about your career journey, tell us about Genomics England. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Research Adjacent. If you're listening in a podcast app, please check you're subscribed and then use the links in the episode description to find full show notes and to follow the podcast on LinkedIn or Instagram. You can also find all the links and other episodes at www.researchadjacent.com. Research Adjacent is presented and produced by Sarah McCluskey, and the theme music is by Lemon Music Studios on Pixabay. And you, yes you, get a big gold star for listening right to the end. See you next time.